Hey everyone. So when you think about the US-Canada border, you probably picture something friendly, right? The world's longest undefended border, a story of peaceful negotiation. But what if I told you the history behind that line on the map is actually a lot more forceful? Today, we're going to dig into a history that pretty much challenges that entire idea.
And that's the big question, isn't it? Was this border really born from peace and handshakes? Or was this path carved out by something much more, well, confrontational? The story we're exploring today suggests the map we all know wasn't just drawn with ink, but with a threat of steel.
Okay, let's get right into it. The main argument here is that there was this consistent pattern that kept playing out, and it was a pattern defined less by quiet diplomacy and more by direct pressure, by ultimatums, and by the very real threat of military force.
And it almost always followed this same three-step playbook. First, the U.S. would apply military force, or just as effectively, a credible threat of it. Second, Britain, really wanting to avoid another big, costly war in North America, would make a calculated choice to back down. And third, the end result, territory gets handed over to the United States. It's a cycle that happened over and over again.
Now let's look at the actual evidence, because this wasn't just a one-off incident. We're talking about 7 key moments, spread out over more than 100 years, where this exact pattern led to major territorial losses for what would become Canada.
And this timeline just lays it all out, doesn't it? It really shows you how relentless this was. We're starting in the late 1700s and going all the way into the early 20th century. From the Great Lakes to the forests of Maine to the Pacific coast, this was a constant theme. So let's take our first case, Detroit. For about 13 years, it was, for all intents and purposes, a part of Upper Canada. But then, the professional army of the United States, the Legion, literally just marches in. Facing a real invasion, the British forces evacuated. And just like that, the area was under U.S. control.
Then you've got the curious case of the Indian Stream Republic. It was this small, kind of independent buffer zone that was very pro-Canadian, but here it wasn't even the federal army. The New Hampshire militia just invaded, arrested the local leadership, and boom. The territory was forcibly annexed.
Now get a load of this number, 50,000. That's how many U.S. troops were mobilized over a border dispute in the forests between Maine and New Brunswick. This wasn't some tiny patrol clashing. This was the buildup for a massive conflict.
So what was the result of bringing 50,000 troops to the table? Well, there were 12,000 square miles of disputed territory, all claimed by New Brunswick. To avoid that full-scale war, Britain ended up surrendering 7,000 of those square miles. That's a huge piece of land, given up entirely because of that military pressure.
I'm sure you've heard this one before. 54-40 or fight. It sounds like a great campaign slogan, right? But the thing is, it was so much more than that. It was a very clear political and military ultimatum, and it was backed up by serious preparations for a war over the entire Oregon country.
And when you're faced with an ultimatum like that, what do? Well, Britain blinked. They abandoned their really strong claims south of the Columbia River and agreed to the 49th parallel. That single decision handed over the entire Pacific Northwest, what is now Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, to the United States.
And listen, it wasn't just about these huge chunks of land either. The same pattern played out for much smaller but incredibly strategic spots. Places like Horseshoe Reef near Niagara Falls and the San Juan Islands out in the Pacific. In both cases, naval posturing and long-term U.S. Army occupations were the tools that ultimately secured them for America.
And the last case brings us all the way to 1903 with the Alaska Panhandle. Now, Canada desperately needed a port for access to the Yukon goldfields, but President Teddy Roosevelt, well, he was not having it. He bluntly threatened to send the army up there to run the line himself by force. So when it went to arbitration, guess who the panel sided with? The U.S. got the entire coastline.
So you might be wondering, okay, this is all fascinating history, but why does it still matter? Well, the point is that these weren't just lines moving around on a piece of paper. These changes had deep, profound, and lasting consequences for how North America developed.
Every single one of these concessions was a major strategic blow to what would eventually become Canada. We're talking about losing control of major rivers, losing vital ports and access to the sea, giving up huge resource-rich forests and lands, not to mention strategic islands you'd need for defense. All of this completely changed how people settled, where trade flowed, everything.
So when you step back and you look at all this evidence together, it really does completely reframe the story we're usually told.
It forces us to look right past that popular myth of a simple, peaceful border created between friends.
The reality is that on the ground, back in the 19th century, relations were often anything but friendly. The border we see today is a direct product of this pattern of coercion and confrontation, where having a credible threat of force was, consistently, the winning hand.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. When we uncover a history like this one, a history of coercion hiding beneath a myth of peace, how does that change the way we think about the special relationships that nations claim to have? You have to wonder, what other stories are hiding just beneath the surface?
You know, exploring these hidden stories is exactly what we love to do. And if you want to go even deeper on this and other topics, I am absolutely thrilled to announce that as of today, April 1st, 2026, we have a whole new place for you to do that.
You can now head over to www.samael.inc. That's SAMAEL.inc. It's going to be your new hub for deeper dives. You'll find all the content from this whole series, tailor-made reports, even source documents you can use for your own projects, all of it. And of course, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you listen. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.